A powerful single millionaire in Manhattan, infamous for his harsh and stingy nature, had fired 5 housekeepers simply because they asked for a raise of only a few dollars. He believed no one could meet his sky-high expectations, especially when it came to his luxurious home and his little daughter who was bravely battling cancer. Then, on a fateful afternoon in New York, he came home earlier than usual and stepped into the living room. There, he froze. The new waitress he'd met at a local cafe, whom he had just hired temporarily, was kneeling on the carpet beside his daughter, gently placing a brown wig on the little girl's bald head. It wasn't part of her job, but the tenderness of the act made his daughter's face light up with a genuine smile, a smile he hadn't seen in months. That moment made the man who had seemed untouchable feel the wall around his heart shatter. This wasn't just compassion, it was something money could never buy, and it changed him forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, and comment below where you're watching from so we know. Alexander Hayes had built a vast financial empire from nothing. A single billionaire with a fortune worth billions, he ran investment funds on Wall Street, where each of his decisions could alter the fate of thousands. But behind the powerful exterior and his bespoke suits, Alexander's personal life was a relentless chain of tragedies. 2 years ago, his wife, the only source of light in his cold, unfeeling world, died suddenly in a car accident on the Brooklyn Bridge. Her death not only left an immense void, but also thrust him into the role of reluctant single father, caring for his 7-year-old daughter Lily, who was now battling a vicious cancer. Lily, once bright-eyed and full of childlike joy, had grown frail after months of grueling chemotherapy at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital. Her long, lustrous hair had all fallen out, leaving behind a pale, bald head, a cruel reminder of the storm ravaging her tiny body. Alexander, a man used to controlling everything with money and power, now felt utterly powerless in the face of his daughter's suffering. He buried himself in work to escape, but the luxurious Upper East Side penthouse with sweeping views over the windswept Central Park had become nothing more than a cold shell, filled only with the faint hum of medical monitors whispering fate. Midnight pains, frantic ambulance rides through New York's crowded streets, all of it hardened Alexander further with each passing day. Known for his infamous temper and stinginess, Alexander had fired 5 housekeepers within just 6 months. Each dismissal stemmed from trivial reasons. A stain left on the kitchen floor, a late meal, or worse, the audacity to ask for a raise of merely a few dollars per hour. He justified it by claiming the current pay was more than enough for housework, insisting that no one could ever meet his impossibly high standards. His home had to be spotless, like a 5-star hotel in Times Square. Meals had to rival those of Michelin-starred restaurants, and above all, no one was allowed near Lily. Unless he permitted it, he feared that intimacy from strangers would blur the fragile boundary of families still clinging together. Previous housekeepers kept their distance, avoiding Lily's gaze as though her illness were something contagious carried in her eyes. They came and went, leaving Alexander with nothing but deepening loneliness, a place where wealth could no longer buy peace. In desperation, Alexander hired Grace Thompson, a waitress from a small cafe in Brooklyn, as a temporary housekeeper for less than market pay. He had met her by chance one rainy morning when he stopped by the cafe, struck by her warm smile and determined eyes amid the rush of the city. Grace, modest in her worn apron, accepted the job without bargaining, even knowing the wage barely covered survival in such an expensive city. Alexander barely spoke to her, issuing curt instructions by text, treating her as an invisible cleaner who was to stay far from his private life. What he didn't know was that Grace carried her own painful past, unseen scars from years of caring for a loved one in the shadow of illness. She entered the penthouse quietly, yet her smile seemed to bring with it a rare hint of warmth, like a shaft of sunlight slipping between skyscrapers. Still, Alexander kept his distance, fearing that any connection might unravel the fragile world he and Lily were struggling to hold together. But was Grace, with her compassionate heart, truly just a temporary housekeeper? Or would she become the key to unlocking the doors Alexander had sealed shut for so long? That day, work on Wall Street ended early, leaving him with the familiar exhaustion, as if numbers and contracts could never fill the void inside. He pushed open the heavy glass door, expecting the cold silence of his home, where only the sound of Lily's health monitor echoed. But as he stepped into the living room, time seemed to stop. Alexander froze, his eyes widening, his heart pounding as if gripped by a moment that did not belong to his world. On the expensive Persian rug, Grace Thompson, the waitress from the Brooklyn Cafe, was kneeling beside Lily. The little girl, her face pale after the latest round of chemotherapy at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, sat patiently on the armchair, her small hands clasped tightly together. Grace, with a gentleness like sunlight slipping through skyscrapers, was carefully placing a dark brown wig onto Lily's bald head. Her fingers moved with delicate precision, adjusting each strand as though she were repainting a faded portrait. Every movement carried the meticulous touch of an artist, unhurried, unpretentious, yet deeply meaningful. Lily's eyes, often dulled by pain and medication, suddenly sparkled like Christmas lights on Fifth Avenue. Her smile bloomed, pure and radiant, as though cancer had never touched her. Grace smiled back, her gaze glowing with a joy so genuine it was as if Lily's happiness were her own. Alexander stood still at the doorway, feeling like an outsider stumbling into a moment too intimate to intrude upon. This was not Grace's job. She had been hired at below-market pay to clean, cook, and keep the penthouse spotless like a five-star hotel in Times Square, not to fit wigs or bring light back into his daughter's world. And yet this scene, so simple yet profound, tightened his chest. He remembered the housekeepers before. They kept their distance, their eyes darting away from Lily as though illness were something contagious carried in her gaze. Grace was different. She sat on the floor without hesitation, as if Lily's illness were not a barrier but a part of a story she was willing to share. Lily's smile, the smile Alexander had not seen in months now, flickered like a small flame, igniting the darkness of their cold home. But along with gratitude, unease crept into Alexander's mind. How could a waitress, someone he had only encountered briefly in Brooklyn, touch his daughter in a way he himself could not? He remembered mornings when his wife used to fit wigs on Lily, making her laugh like that before cancer stole everything away. Grace, with an act far beyond any contract, seemed to be stepping into a sacred role he had wanted to keep within the family. He stood there, torn between relief at seeing Lily happy and fear of losing the last role he still held, the father who brought joy to his child. That moment, like a lightning strike over the New York sky, shook the walls of the heart Alexander had built so high. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water before continuing. The story ahead holds even more unexpected turns. Comment 1 if you find this story moving, so we know you are still with us. The moment Grace Thompson placed the wig on Lily's head, bringing a radiant smile to the little girl's pale face, she planted a seed of hope in Alexander's heart. Yet that seed remained trapped beneath the ice of grief and unease. Grace, the waitress from Brooklyn, did more than sweep the dust from the floors of the Upper East Side penthouse. She quietly wove her way into Lily's life, carrying with her the warmth this house had long been missing. In the days following that moment, Alexander began to notice something different, as though the light from New York's street lamps was slowly seeping into the darkness of his soul. Grace's efforts did not stop at cleaning or preparing meals fit for Michelin-starred restaurants. She turned rainy Manhattan afternoons into little adventures indoors, using Lily's old toys to spin tales of princesses and trains passing through Central Park. Each time Lily giggled, the sound rang like a bell through the vast living room, shattering the heavy silence that once reigned. One night, when a storm rolled in from Brooklyn and cut power across the neighborhood, the home was plunged into suffocating darkness. Lily, who had feared the dark ever since her long hospital stays, burst into tears, her sobs sharp and piercing, slicing into Alexander's heart. He stood frozen in his office, phone clutched tightly in his hand, but his legs felt nailed to the floor, helpless, not knowing how to soothe his daughter. Grace, with the instinct of someone who had endured long nights of illness before, quietly retrieved candles from the darkened kitchen. The flickering glow lit her face, tender as moonlight over the Hudson River. She knelt beside Lily, wrapping the child in her arms, letting the warmth of her body soften the trembling. Then she began to sing a lullaby, each note falling like raindrops against the window pane. That song, which Alexander would later learn she once sang to her sister, worked like magic, pulling Lily out of her fear and guiding her into the safety of dreams. Alexander stood in the doorway, under the wavering candlelight, witnessing a scene that looked like a painting come alive. He realized Grace had not only returned Lily's smile, but had created a sense of emotional safety no amount of his wealth could ever buy. And yet, within Alexander, a quiet war raged. He was grateful to Grace for bringing light back to Lily, but at the same time he was afraid. Afraid that her presence, a stranger, a waitress, was overshadowing his own role as Lily's only parent. Each night as he passed his daughter's room, he paused, listening to Grace's voice drifting through the cracked door. That sound, like waves breaking on the shores of Long Island, eased some of the tension inside him. The house was no longer a hollow fortress. It had begun to breathe with life, with the fragile essence of family. Alexander, a man used to controlling everything, now stood before a question. Could he open his heart to embrace the change Grace was bringing? Was Grace unknowingly becoming the missing piece of this family? Or would her presence force Alexander to confront his deepest fear? Comment below what you think will happen next. Lily's giggles, once sparked by Grace like Christmas lights along Fifth Avenue, had now been replaced by faint whimpers. One early morning, as dawn crept between the skyscrapers, Lily was suddenly burning with fever, her fragile body trembling beneath a thin blanket. Alexander, a man used to controlling everything with power and wealth, stood frozen at his daughter's door, his heart clenched tight with the familiar terror of Lily's long battle with cancer. The house, once warmed by Grace's presence, now felt pulled into an invisible storm, threatening to erase the fragile hope that had just begun to flicker. Grace, the waitress from Brooklyn, entered the room with the composure of someone who had faced crises like this before. She knelt beside Lily's bed, her hand gently pressing to the child's forehead, feeling the heat radiating like a furnace on a New York winter night. Without hesitation, she signaled to Alexander to bring a clean towel and a bowl of cool water from the lavish kitchen. He, so often proud of his quick decision-making on Wall Street, obeyed without question, surprised at the certainty in Grace's every movement. She checked Lily's temperature with a thermometer, her eyes sharp yet tender, like a lighthouse in a storm. The number was above the safe limit, but Grace did not panic. She instructed Alexander to dip the towel, wring it out and place it gently on Lily's forehead, each action carrying the precision of someone who had walked this path before. She adjusted the pillow to ease Lily's breathing, cracked open the window just enough to let the fresh air of Central Park drift in, careful not to chill the room. Every gesture radiated the quiet weight of painful experience, as though Grace had once stood in cold hospital rooms, holding the hand of someone she loved through endless nights. Alexander watched, realizing her calmness was no accident. As Lily's breathing slowly steadied, Grace sat at the edge of the bed, her hand cradling the small fingers, her gaze never leaving the girl's pale face. From the corner of the room, Alexander felt an unfamiliar mixture of gratitude and shame. He had once dismissed Grace as merely a low-paid waitress, a temporary fixture in his household. Yet now, she was the only one steady enough to hold the room together, transforming a crisis into a moment of control. Even after Lily drifted into light sleep, Grace remained, vigilant, yet tender, like a mother out of an American bedtime story. Finally, Alexander could no longer hold back. He stepped closer, his voice low, barely more than a whisper along the Hudson River. "How do you know how to do these things?" Grace, her eyes still fixed on Lily, answered softly, as if her words carried the weight of a painful memory. "My sister, she fought cancer for many years." The confession struck like lightning, illuminating the hidden corners of Alexander's mind. He realized he had judged Grace too quickly, never knowing she carried her own history of loss. Gratitude now blended with regret, like streetlights reflecting on Manhattan's rain-slicked streets. He whispered, "Thank you," the words heavy, an admission that Grace had become the light within their storm. But is this moment enough to shatter the final wall around Alexander's heart, or is there a deeper secret about Grace waiting to be revealed? Comment below what you think will happen next. After Lily's terrifying fever, when Grace, the waitress from Brooklyn, calmed the crisis with her steady, practiced composure, Alexander began to see her with different eyes. The gentle lullabies, the playful moments with Lily, and her devotion during that night of danger had melted the ice around his heart. Yet amid the bustling streets of Manhattan, a secret from Grace's past was about to surface, like streetlights shimmering on rain-soaked pavement, ready to illuminate the hidden corners of their story. One late afternoon, as the golden hues of sunset bathed Central Park, Alexander was sorting through the living room closet to find extra blankets for Lily. The autumn winds of New York were turning sharper, and he wanted to ensure his daughter stayed warm. As he pulled down a thick wool blanket from the top shelf, a small object slipped out and fell onto the hardwood floor with a faint, misplaced note of sound. He bent down, expecting nothing more than a scrap of forgotten paper, but it was a photograph, its edges yellowed with age. In the picture, Grace, her smile gentle yet resilient, held tightly to a young girl with no hair, lying in a hospital bed likely somewhere in Baltimore. The girl, pale but radiant, leaned against Grace's shoulder, and both stared into the camera with a defiance that dared fate itself. Alexander froze. The photograph cut through him like a sharp blade, shattering every shallow assumption he had once made about Grace. The image told a wordless story of long nights by a hospital bedside, of tears shed, of fragile hope clung to. Alexander realized this must have been Grace's sister, the one she had mentioned briefly while caring for Lily. Grace didn't just know how to lower a fever or sing a lullaby. She had lived through the storm, holding the hand of someone she loved in their darkest hours. The photo brought her past into vivid focus, explaining the calm assurance she had shown during Lily's crisis, like a lighthouse in a raging sea. Carefully, Alexander placed the photo back, but the image burned into his mind, filling him with quiet respect mingled with regret. He had thought of Grace only as a low-paid waitress, a temporary figure in their lives. Now, he saw her as a survivor, someone scarred by loss, not unlike himself. Meanwhile, in her small room, Grace sat staring at her phone screen. An email had arrived from a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C., inviting her to join their team supporting children with cancer, a dream job she had long cherished since the days of caring for her sister at Johns Hopkins. Yet the thought of leaving Lily, the little girl who had become a piece of her heart, made her chest tighten. She quietly folded her clothes, her eyes drifting with the lost look of Brooklyn streets at night. From the hallway, Alexander noticed her uncharacteristic solemnity, the faraway gaze, as she wiped down a table, the slow gestures of someone wrestling with a heavy decision. A fear of losing her swelled within him, like waves crashing against the Hudson, leaving him to wonder whether he could keep her from walking away. The photograph, though unspoken of, had become a beacon revealing that Grace was not just a housekeeper, but a piece of the family they were becoming. Would this secret be enough to change Grace's decision, or is another door waiting to open in Alexander's heart? Comment below whether you think Grace will choose to stay or to go. The photograph of Grace embracing her sister, slipping out from an old suitcase, awakened a painful truth. She was not merely a waitress, but someone who carried scars of loss much like his own. Her devotion to Lily, from the lullabies she sang to the way she calmed the fever, had shaken the fortress of his heart. Yet the fear of losing Grace, as she considered her dream job in Washington, D.C., left him unable to delay any longer. That night, he resolved to confront the past to find answers for the future. Alexander drew a small key from the drawer of his desk, his hand trembling as if he were about to sign another multi-million-dollar contract on Wall Street. The door to the bedroom where memories of his late wife still lingered opened with a soft click. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of lavender perfume mingled with dust, as though the room itself were a forgotten time capsule. His eyes swept across the neatly made bed. A sweater draped over the chair by the window overlooking Central Park, and framed photographs where his wife's smile still radiated. Sitting on the edge of the bed, weighed down by grief, he noticed a small wooden box on the nightstand, something he had never truly paid attention to before. Inside was a letter, penned in his wife's elegant handwriting, written during her final days before the accident on the Brooklyn Bridge. The letter struck like a blade, sharp, yet tender, cutting through the walls Alexander had built. She wrote of her love for him and for Lily, and of her fear that he would lock away his heart after she was gone. "Don't let pain turn you into a stranger, Alex," she wrote. "Let Lily laugh. No matter who brings her that laughter, love will come in unexpected ways." Each word was like a heartbeat, waking him from the slumber of his loneliness. He read it once, then again, tears slipping silently down his face like raindrops against the penthouse windows. The letter did not erase the grief, but it shattered the final barrier he had clung to, making him realize that keeping Grace was not selfish, it was fulfilling the promise he owed to his late wife. The next morning, as dawn crept over the Manhattan skyline, Grace packed her suitcase, her gaze distant, like the empty streets of Brooklyn at first light. She intended to leave for her dream position, but Alexander called her into the dining room. The table was already set with 2 steaming cups of coffee, their warmth rising like an unspoken invitation. He met her eyes, his voice deep but unwavering. "Stay, Grace. Not as the housekeeper, but as part of this family." He promised to support her studies in medicine, to ensure she would have everything she needed. Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as she shook her head at Washington, her eyes shining with resolve. "I already belong here." At that moment, Lily came running, throwing her arms around Grace, whispering "Mom" for the very first time. The word, like a rainbow after a storm, bridged their 3 hearts. And for the first time in 2 years, Alexander felt the penthouse was no longer a fortress of loneliness, but a home where love had been reborn. The letter from his late wife, discovered in the locked room, opened the door to Alexander Hayes's heart, urging him to beg Grace Thompson to stay not as a housekeeper, but as a permanent part of his and Lily's lives. Grace's decision to turn down her dream job in Washington, D.C., along with Lily's tender cry of "Mom," transformed the scars of grief into a rainbow, binding the 3 of them together in an unspoken promise. Years later, that moment still remained the flame that warmed the house once so cold. At the Grand Hall of Columbia University, the stage lights shone on Grace as she stepped forward to receive her degree in pediatric oncology therapy. The black gown and mortarboard could not hide her radiant smile, like sunlight breaking through the trees of Central Park. In the front row, Alexander and Lily, now 15, stood clapping, their eyes glowing with pride. Lily, her long, golden hair restored and her health fully recovered after years of battling cancer, looked like a youthful version of the very dream Grace had once nurtured. As Grace shook hands with the dean, she glanced down and caught Lily's gaze, not the weary look of a child bound to Memorial Sloan Kettering, but one filled with hope and love. That evening, the penthouse transformed into a space brimming with laughter. The dining table was scattered with leftover cake and sparkling wine glasses, beside a bouquet of white roses Alexander and Lily had brought for Grace. Lily, having kicked off her shoes onto the sofa, rested her head on Grace's shoulder, her face tired but blissful. Softly, she asked Grace to sing the old lullaby again, the melody that had once soothed her fears through countless hospital nights. Grace smiled, beginning the first notes, her voice warm and low like the Hudson River under moonlight. Alexander, seated across the table, suddenly joined in, his rough baritone blending seamlessly with Grace's voice, like a duet that required no rehearsal. Lily closed her eyes, a small smile curling on her lips, her breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the song. The room, once heavy with silence, now pulsed with the warmth of a family reborn. Alexander clasped Grace's hand, his eyes fixed on Lily. That grasp was not just a touch, but a silent vow that they had found each other through the shadows of loss. The home, once a lonely fortress overlooking Manhattan's bustling streets, had become a true haven, where Lily's laughter was no longer a fleeting guest. Grace looked around from the worn furniture to the small scratches on the dining table and felt a profound gratitude. She had transformed the pain of losing her sister into a guiding flame not only for Lily, but for herself. Alexander, once locked behind the grief of his wife's death, had learned that love did not require blood ties, only the courage to open one's heart. When the main lights dimmed, leaving only a golden glow from the lamp, Grace tucked a blanket around Lily, gently brushing her hair back. Alexander smiled, his eyes shining like the lights of Times Square. This home, once a place of sorrow, now stood as proof of the power of love and healing. Was their journey a miracle, or simply the result of brave choices? Comment below and share your favorite moment from this story. The journey of Alexander, Grace, and Lily is proof that love and courage can heal even the deepest wounds, even in the darkest shadows of loss and illness. From a cold Manhattan penthouse, they built a home where Lily's laughter rang out like the lights of Times Square. The lesson from this story is both simple and profound. Family is not defined solely by blood, but by shared moments, brave choices, and belief in hope. Whatever hardship you may be facing, open your heart because love always finds its way in unexpected forms, like sunlight streaming through New York's skyscrapers. Thank you for staying with us through this inspiring story. If you're in the U.S., comment below. Where are you watching from, New York, California, or Texas, and what time is it? Share this story with your friends to spread hope. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching stories. See you in the next video.